Pastor Scott Conway, the Quest Xian, the how-to, real answers, explain it all. Maybe it doesn't mean what they say. God trusting, Bible believing, saved by Jesus Church. And by the way, an important part of that bump, just as a reminder, is when we say, maybe it doesn't mean what they say. It also includes us. Maybe it doesn't mean what we say. Maybe it doesn't mean what I say. Just because there is an answer, and just because there is a position, and just because even if you like my answer, doesn't necessarily mean I'm right. And it definitely does not mean that others are necessarily wrong. That's why it doesn't say, or why it says, maybe it doesn't mean what they say, rather than it doesn't mean what they say. It means what we say. In fact, that's one of my ongoing problems with a lot of people on a lot of issues, that they are so sure they're right. I'm okay with that so far. And so sure others are wrong. That's where I have a problem, that they can't have a conversation. Now, I don't mind if someone believes that they're right and they have points to back up their position, then we can have a conversation. But if they're just going to dismiss me out of hand and they're going to try to quote unquote win the argument by doing nothing more than shouting me down, calling me names, and being dismissive, then that's a problem. And that we have that when it comes to the sexes too, between men and women. Sometimes say, well, you're a man, you don't understand, you have nothing to say, or it's a man thing, the women wouldn't understand. And you're dismissing literally half of the planet and saying there's no need to even have a conversation, and that the points and the positions are apparently so self-evident to half of the world that the other half of the world doesn't even need to be talked to. It also makes a mistake of assuming that every single individual in that block all agrees. And so when men or women are dismissing the other sex and the position and the thoughts and the feelings and just all of the thinking and the ideas of the opposite sex, that's what they're doing. They're assuming all of you, by virtue of your genetics, all think exactly like that, and no individual among you is capable of having an opinion that is outside the block, because that is somehow determinative. And whether talking men to women, women to men, or as between the races, or for that matter, even as between the religions. So like, what's the Christian position? Well, depends. What do you mean? What is the official Catholic position by the Catholic Church? What is the range of positions by the bishops? What is the range of positions by practicing Catholics? What is the range of opinions by people who have been through the catechism and baptized into the Catholic Church? All those are different things. And then, do you mean Protestants as a whole? Do you mean Lutherans? Do you mean Baptists? Do you mean the official church position? Do you mean the people who are members of the church? And so there is no official Christian position on most things. Now, the way I define Christianity, and we define it here at Quest Xian, is that the dividing line between a Christian and a non-Christian is accepting Jesus Christ as Savior. And apart from accepting Jesus Christ as Savior, you could have a lot of variation. Now, our position is that if you have specifically rejected Jesus Christ as Savior, you are not a Christian. However, that doesn't mean that you can't be following good Christian values. And sometimes there are people who have a philosophical outlook on life that they don't get from the Bible, that are better examples of what many of us might think of as Christian than some people who are Christians. So you have a lot of that. Similarly, when we're talking about men and women, since we are a more masculinely oriented church, and we talk about masculinity has to do with responsibility, inviting, initiative, power, and selflessness. We talk about responsibility is do what you're supposed to do without being told. Initiative is that you go forward and you do the thing before something makes you have to do the thing. Inviting is doing things in such a way that draws people near and keeps them close. Power is the ability to get yourself to do a thing or make things happen, or get yourself to stop doing a thing or to make things stop happening. And then selflessness is where it's not about me, it's about everyone, and I'm one of everyone. So we have our pieces. And if you want to walk in your masculine energy, if you want to do things in a masculine way, If the situation calls for this kind of energy, all that means is you still have responsibility, inviting, initiative, power, and selflessness, but you double down on initiative and you double down on power. And in particular, personal initiative, which means you look at the things yourself and you decide what needs to be done without waiting for circumstances to force you, without waiting for somebody else to remind you again and again, and maybe drag you kicking and screaming to do it, or having to impose a penalty before the thing gets done. And you double down on your power. You look for the things like, where must I persist? Where must I resist? What must I get myself to do? What must I stop myself from doing? And when you double down on those things, that is a very masculine energy. And that settles a man into his masculine energy, presuming that he's a masculine energy man. And when a situation calls for masculine energy, that's what you do, man or woman, if it's a masculine energy kind of situation. But if you want to feel masculine, if you want to present as masculine, if you want to be perceived as masculine, that's part of what you do. What if you want to be perceived as, received as, and feel feminine? Well, then you do the other side. You do responsibility, initiative, inviting, power, and selflessness, exactly the same. But now you double down on inviting and you double down on selflessness. Now, what that means is when you double down on inviting is that you specifically do things and you settle into that place that draws other people near and keeps them close. And for selflessness, it means you do the sort of things that respect the community and that connect to the people and that are in service to others and yourself. That's one of the places we get in trouble sometimes with martyr syndrome. It's not self-sacrifice for the sake of others. It's the acknowledgement of the intrinsic equality of all people. That's why I say it's not about me, it's about everyone. And then the reminder, just in case, it's not about me, it's about everyone, is part of don't be selfish. But the reminder that I'm one of everyone means I must be included in that circle. Because if I'm going to be selfless and I'm going to ask you to be selfless and I don't include me, then I'm asking you to not include you. And if I ask you to not include yourself, well, that's not very inviting or very selfless, because how can I model a principle that asks people to ignore their own interests, to ignore that which is good for them, to ignore that which is healthy for them? That ends up not really making a lot of sense. So in a broad principle level, you want to make sure that you're doing these things correctly. Now, something that came up recently and led to another discussion kind of ties into a topic that has come up many, many times over the years, probably at least 25 years. And sometimes I'm considered like an official woman or an honorary woman, meaning that women feel comfortable having conversations around me that would deal with traditionally feminine things, that I can engage in conversations about any number of women's issues, about periods, about sanitation stuff. When I'm a single man living alone in my apartment, I would always keep pads and tampons available underneath my bathroom sink. When I had a condo where there was a pool and a jacuzzi, I always kept a couple of spare women's bathing suits, typically a string bikini so it could be adjusted to any size body, an oversized opaque t-shirt that could cover up the body if someone wasn't comfortable wearing that kind of bathing suit, a medium-sized women's one piece, so that if a woman that ran out of any of her necessaries, I had them, and that the women knew that I had them. And so being very comfortable with these things is kind of let women relax around me. Well, one of the things that periodically comes up, and a lot of women over the years have assumed that this has to do with my understanding of the feminine, my understanding of relationships, my understanding of relationships from the woman's side, is my understanding of what it's like as a woman to have your identity compromised, my understanding of what it's like as a woman to not really be able to be who you are, but to have to be other things for other people. To live in that contradiction of having to surrender your own hopes and your own dreams and your own desires to some form of a collective, to stop being the woman that you were or the woman you always hoped you would be, because you have to be this kind of woman to be a good wife, you have to be this kind of woman to be a good mother, and that you kind of get trapped by society and kind of forced along this funnel in a way that compromises your spirit and is just sometimes soul crushing. And without getting into like unpacking all of the kind of details that so many women go through with that, of feeling oppressed, feeling funneled, feeling unlistened to, feeling like her own thoughts and her own feelings and her own opinions really don't matter because she's trapped. And they want to know sometimes like how do you understand this? Like is it from your mother? Is it because of some of the women you've been close to? I know you don't have any sisters. So, well, here's basically what that boils down to. And I'm sure some of the men who were listening to that part will agree with this, is because it's just the feminine version of the exact same thing men go through. Men go through that. So that there's I personally find it a little bit offensive. I also agree with it somewhat too. But here gets to be part of the thing is we talk about how, well, girls just grow up faster than boys do. Well, maybe that's true. Maybe that isn't. It depends. What do you mean by growing up? Do you mean fulfilling your responsibilities? Well, everyone who fulfills their responsibilities is grown up in my book. What they usually mean when they're talking about, well, women mature faster than men do, it's that women walk in this inviting and the selfless energy typically faster than men do. Well, that's because that's feminine energy. That's not necessarily more grown up, because when you also look at the grand scheme of things, which sex tends to take more initiative and seek out more power? Well, typically that has been the masculine historically. And the definition of maturity, that particularly in the Christian church, of spiritual maturity being the embodiment of traditionally feminine values, and therefore the dismissal of traditional masculine values as innately immature, is somewhat problematic. And so men in general, masculine energy in general, tends to get a bad rap. Now, part of the reason it gets a bad rap, and this is where I agree with it, is just because you take initiative doesn't mean you're taking initiative on good things. Just because you're exercising power doesn't mean you're exercising power in good things either. And if we see too many examples of initiative taken in unhealthy, immature ways, and power exercised in unhealthy, dysfunctional, immature ways, the more that's going to seem like that's a bad thing. But it's not a bad thing, because here's part of emotion in general. We tend to fixate on negative emotions because negative emotions are emotions of change. So if I'm angry, that is an emotion that says one of my must or must not rules are being broken, and I think something needs to change. Now, honestly, what's most likely to need to change is my rule. That I need to really look at my rule to see, do I have a really good rule? But then let's assume that I do have a good rule, but I'm still angry. Well, the next question isn't, well, how do I force compliance with my rule? The next question is, well, how do I change my behavior, often by engaging in conversation, engaging in collaboration, engaging in connection, so that we get a mutual understanding of my own good rule. And if it really is a good rule, very likely an agreement that it's a good rule, and develop an agreement that gets my rule followed to the extent it's a healthy, good rule that, say, for instance, you yourself individually ought to be following. Well, that requires a significant degree of maturity. And often we as human beings, male or female, tend to not do that. How do we tend to want to get compliance? We yell, we scream, we complain, we cry, we manipulate. We have all of these emotional blackmail things that we do that really isn't mature. But if the goal is get the rule followed, it's logical. It's just not terribly sophisticated. It's a relatively immature way to do things, but it's also normal because it's what we do culturally. Now, if someone wants me to comply with some rule set that they have, do I want them to yell, scream, punish, threaten, manipulate, cry, play all of these games to try to get me to do the thing they want to do? Or do I want them to actually have a conversation with me and have a collaborative conversation to develop a plan that we agree on that will get their rule that I agree is reasonable in their rule, and then have collaborative compliance? I would rather someone did that with me. So therefore, logically, golden rule 101, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And then you do it in a way that works with that individual, which is, we call it the platinum rule, but it's really the embodiment of the fundamental purpose behind the golden rule, is then you treat others the way others want to be treated. So if I want to show you respect, I won't show you respect in the way that's respectful to me. I will show you respect in the way that's respectful to you, because the goal is to express respect. And if you receive respect differently than I receive respect, and the goal is respect, then I do it in the language that makes sense to you. Now, we understand this a lot in the realm of love languages. So my love language is a physical touch and active service. And so if you want to demonstrate a love and honor toward me, if you want to show respect toward me, lots of physical touch does it, and lots of acts of service do it. I'm not so much a quality time person, where you don't have to spend a lot of time with me or a lot of time on me. That I like words of affirmation, but you don't need a lot of words of affirmation. They're nice. I do like them, but those aren't fundamental to me. And then gifts, I can really honestly take or leave gifts. That now, if you're gifting me an experience, or you're gifting me the ability to craft or share an experience, hey, I might be all about that, because now that's an act of service that's equipping me for a thing. But if you're just going to give me stuff, that doesn't do it for me. Now, for some people, what if I'm with a partner and her love language is gifts and words of affirmation? Well, if I want to express my love and respect, then I want to express my love and respect in gifts and the words of affirmation. So you have this thing of, okay, so the principle is the same. That's the platinum rule, which is the real meaning behind the golden rule. So back to the masculine and the feminine. So when we have men and women working together, men and women dealing with each other, and the women talk about the idea of, well, I just want a level playing field. Okay, is there any of us that don't want a level playing field? I think all of us would like to be afforded the opportunity for a level playing field. But here's one of the problems we run into as between men and women is we can know and understand our own experience. The part we often overlook is how similar someone else's experience might be to our own. Now, a lot of mothers can easily connect on the point of being mothers, that all of them have been pregnant, all of them have given birth, all of them have in some way taken care of their newborn infant, and all the mothers who are breastfed have there's all this shared experience. Men who have had children with their wives also have similar experiences with one another. Now, have the husbands who had children with their wives had similar experiences to the women who have had children with their husbands? No, there's a whole bunch of biology that's different there. But when you get outside of the realm of pregnancy, and outside of the realm of breastfeeding, and outside of the realm of giving birth, and we come into this modern era, and where we have a lot more birth control, we have a lot more ability to engage in sexual activity without having as many children, that we can engage in the sort of behavior that left devoid of all birth control might have resulted in 10, 15 children. and have only 2 or 3. So that kind of more levels that playing field. But this idea that a lot of women have that, well, women's life is sometimes soul crushing and funnels them down this path that doesn't really fit them, but they have to do it because of the collective. Well, men have exactly that same experience, where men often feel like they're being funneled down their path. And that doesn't really matter who they are as individuals. It doesn't really matter what they want. That's the path. And they're a man. They have to do the path. So there was a story, and if you don't already know that I'm a lawyer, most people know that I'm a lawyer. So there was someone seeking to be a partner in a law firm. Well, what had happened is he went to law school. He didn't really want to be part of a law firm. He wanted it to practice like a kind of an activism law. You could think of like environmental law, dealing with stuff like that would be an easy metaphor to think about it. But by the time he was graduating from law school, he was about to get married. And he figured, okay, well, if I'm going to be able to take care of a wife, if I'm going to be able to be a good provider, I need to get a good, solid job. And what I'll do is I'll get this good job, and I'll do that for a while, and we'll build up some money. And then I can go do the thing I really want to do, the thing that's really on my heart, the thing I really have a passion for. But if I'm going to take care of a wife, I have this responsibility, and I have to take care of that. And he got far enough along, and he's doing okay. And then his wife is pregnant, and he was like, okay, well, I'm about to be a dad, and got to take care of my wife and my kid, and in particular, as my wife gets pregnant, so she can take time off of work, and I want to give her the option to be able to stay home, so she doesn't have to work full time. And to do that, I've got to become the junior partner, and I got to work really hard to do that. Well, this sort of thing continued on year after year after year. For the first child, the second child, wanting to get into a better neighborhood so the children could have a better school, and that his wife and his kids could be in a safer neighborhood, and always kind of pushing to make more money and to rise up in this law firm until he's closing in on being a full partner. And his wife takes the kids and leaves him, files for divorce, doesn't like him anymore, and hasn't liked him for a long time. And this man in this men's group, having just buckled and broken down and slipped out of his chair on the ground, sobbing, because he says, I've spent my entire adult life becoming someone I don't even like. I can't blame her. I don't like me either. And what had happened? Responsibility, one of the fundamentals of adult life, fundamental. And a fundamental responsibility, but and this was, we're talking decades ago, where a man was expected to make enough money so his wife could be home. If a wife worked, it was supposed to be optional. It wasn't supposed to be mandatory back then. And he was a lawyer, so he had the capability of making more money, and he pursued that with a passion. But as someone who is licensed as a lawyer, I'll tell you that if you want to be a good lawyer, there's a certain way you have to start to think. There's a certain way you have to start to view life through arguments and evidence and sides, and how do I win, and how do I this, and just the sheer number of hours it takes, and the particular mindset is not always conducive to relationship. And she fell in love initially years before with a young man who had passion, with a young man who had a vision. And now she was married to a lawyer, not someone licensed to practice law who was doing something he was passionate about making a difference, but a man who was putting in the hours of a want to be general partner attorney, someone who had the thinking and the mindset and the arguments of someone who was a lawyer, who came home as a lawyer, who went to bed with her as a lawyer, who woke up with her as a lawyer. And she didn't like it. The kids didn't like it. It was making them miserable. The only thing that was a saving grace is there's money. Well, for that man, on the plus side, he could continue to provide for his family as an ex-husband to their mother. But he didn't like who he was. He got channeled down that career funnel that led to him being someone he didn't even like. And this is the experience of man after man after man who got into something that maybe he had some passion for. Maybe he was a really good technician who got bit by the entrepreneurial bug. And so he started a business and he launched off into doing his thing, and it ended up being all consuming. So in similar vein, I was talking to a man who was a part of a mastermind. He heard me talk about kind of this balance of life and balance of principles. One of the things I teach on is the Ohana way, and Ohana means family. And that as an acronym, it's oasis, harmony, assertiveness, nobility, and aloha. And how you show up with that in business, and that you do the principles in business and at home the same. And well, this man was talking to me, and he said that, in his circle of masterminds, it was a business mastermind, all men, all focused on business. And I forget if there were 10 or 12 of them. But what he said is that every single one of us hit every single business goal we made. Every single one of us are millionaires. And every single one of us is divorced. The last of us that was still married, his wife just told him that she wants a divorce, and she's filed papers that they're on the way to getting divorced. All of us lost our wives. All of us lost our families. And during the course of the conversation, I asked them, like, now, had I asked any of you 5 years ago, 10 years ago, why are you working so hard? Why is this money so important to you? How many of you do you think would have said, well, it's for my family? And said, well, yeah, probably all of them, right? But they didn't prioritize their family. They prioritized the money. They turned themselves into nothing more than wallets. And then they were surprised when all that was left for them to be were wallets. So some of this stuff, it's a masculine experience. Now, for some women, when women listen to this, they go, oh, I can relate to that. Maybe it's not a woman's experience in the man's world. And maybe it's not a man's experience in a woman-driven world. Maybe it's a human experience in an all too human world. So we have what we call a normal distribution. Classically, you'll have it called a bell curve. And it's the normal distribution where the bulk of the people in the middle, and then there's the outliers on both sides. One of the ways to think of it is like with IQ. And with IQ, you might have, a 100 IQ is right in the middle. And a normal IQ, you might figure a normal IQ is from 90 to 110. And when you drop below 85, you're in the bottom 10% of the IQ. And when you go above 115, you're in the top 10% of the IQ. I mean, we might not consider that genius, but that's pretty smart. You're doing pretty good. Depending on the IQ test, when you pass 130 or 140 or somewhere in there, you're in the official genius level, you're in the top 2% and such. And then that's a normal distribution. On most of these distributions, the distribution curve for men tends to be flatter and has longer tails. And so you take IQ, the further you go on one end of the IQ spectrum, you have fewer and fewer people, but the men's tail tends to go out a little bit longer on both sides. So when you go to the very highest IQ people, they tend to skew male. When you go to the very lowest IQ people, they also tend to skew male. Now, part of the thing that is curious that happens is women tend to have a higher middle and a shorter tail, again, on a lot of things. And so women are a little bit more homogeneous than men. But then here gets to be a big thing is on a lot of things, and IQ being one of them, the middle of the bell curve pretty much lines up. Well, what does that mean? It's like, well, so long as you avoid the 10% on both sides, you take it 80% in the middle, men and women are pretty much alike. That when you see differences in men and women, well, you're more likely looking at individual variance rather than male female variance. Now, there's some things obviously that are just flat out different. Who gives birth? Who's going to breastfeed? Who's going to get pregnant? Okay, but aside from reproductive biology, when you start to deal with some of the other elements of being male or being female, you look at something like height. Like, who's taller, men or women? Well, bell curve wise, the middle of the bell curve for men is taller than the middle of the bell curve for women. But does anyone harbor any illusion that every male is taller than every female? Of course not. All of us know women who are tall. All of us know men who are short. It's not this universal thing that all males are stronger than all females. All males are heavier than all females. There's a dramatic overlap. And what you end up with is the strongest males are more stronger than the weakest males than the average male is to the average female. And when you begin to see that even when there's a divergence, that when you take the top quintile, which is the top 25% and then the bottom 25%, and you compare the middles, if you look at the top 1 out of 4 men in height, and you look at the shortest 1 out of 4 men in height, there's more difference there than there is between the middle of the men and the middle of the women. And the more we understand that as between men and women, the more we can connect, the more we can collaborate. Very often when we're talking about male-female relationships, there tends to be a focus on the difference. And one of the reasons why there tends to be a focus on the difference is that it should be, theoretically, should be easy for me to relate to that which is the same about you. And so, for instance, should I have any trouble understanding that when you haven't eaten for a while, you're hungry? I should get that, because when I haven't eaten for a while, I'm hungry. I'm human, you're human, that's a human thing. Should it make sense to me that, I need to have a certain amount of water every day, and you should need to have a certain amount of water? Of course, because, the human body needs water. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff we should just automatically understand because it's so very much the same. But something that is happening more and more is there gets to be this presumption that there's certain things that are entirely male and certain other things that are entirely female. And to some extent, we could probably blame feminism. But one of the things feminism deals with as a group is it was women looking at women's experience and comparing it to what they could see of men's experience. Well, if the men do not communicate effectively how similar their own experience is to the experience that women are talking about, it's really hard to establish a collaborative understanding. So part of what I'm hoping that we're accomplishing here is establishing some kind of a collaborative understanding, whether or not there's really been much in the way of conversation. So both men and women end up in these soul-crushing places where the expectations placed upon them is fundamentally at odds with who they are. Now, one of the differences, and this is not a statistical difference between men and women, and so usually when somebody has a statistical difference, I treat it like it's an 80-20 rule. So about 80% of the time, I would guess, men tend to be channel thinkers, and women tend to be everything's connected thinkers. Sometimes you'll hear the metaphor of men are like waffles, women are like spaghetti. Or like, one of the ways I've heard it described with men is a man walks into his brain and it's like there's all these different boxes. Or it's like having a television with all these different channels, and he's only on one channel at a time, and he has a channel with nothing on it. He has a channel 0. He has a nothing box. He has an ability to literally be thinking of nothing. When you see a man kind of spacing out, it's not that he's meandering around 1,000 topics. He could literally be thinking about nothing. And this tends to be a statistical truism because I know plenty of men whose brains are constantly on everything all the time. Likewise, I know some women who have that very discrete channel based thinking. So it's a statistical truism, not an absolute truism. Well, here gets to be the problem then sometimes that men have this both an advantage and a disadvantage. Is a lot of men have this internal conflict that goes on a lot, where they have this kind of subjective sense of what it means to be a man. And then they also have the sense of what it means to be a husband. And a lot of what it means to be a husband seems to be connected to is my wife happy? Now, first off, should how well I'm doing on something be determined even just by my own emotion? Should there be some objective standard, whether something is good or bad? It should all have to do with feeling. Well, I kind of think having something in the realm of objective standard is kind of useful. And so some men try to do things with the hope that the wife just won't be upset, or maybe she'll be happy. And he's like trying to like someone just walk on eggshells, just not make her upset. Or at least if she's upset, not feel like she's justified in being upset. Then you get this other category, being father. Well, someone that's feeling like you're a good dad is like that's another different game. Now, sometimes, now what gets curious is when I talk to a lot of parents about their kids and say, I just want my children to grow up to be, the most common thing you hear is happy. I want my kids to be happy. So we have a metaphor here where it seems that both parents have the same thing and sometimes struggle with their kids being emotional and not really liking something. And how often, as a martial arts instructor, parents bring their kids to me to see if it's something that their kids enjoy, if it's something their kids want to do. And not so much as to whether or not they think this will be good for their child. And they're going to keep their child in the class so long as they think this is good for their child. That very often, if the kid wants to quit, they'll let the kid quit because it's a want thing. It's a how does he feel? Is he happy thing? And so we all have a similar metaphor that we see in operation. And then when you try to just cater to the emotions of a child, is that always in the best interest of the child? Sometimes it is. A lot of times it's not. But you get this behavior set sometimes where you get a conflict in my sense of what it means to be a man, and my sense of what it means to be a good husband, and my sense of what it means to be a good father. Now, because of men's tendency toward channel thinking, being able to compartmentalize things uh, very often better than the average woman does, again, statistically true, but not absolutely true by any stretch of the imagination, that it lets men sometimes live with the contradiction. Well, you might be able to conduct yourself within the contradiction for a period of time, but it's still a contradiction. If you have to keep changing gears in order to deal with the contradiction, you're going to run into some challenges. And a lot of men do this. Now, a lot of women run into it, but they tend to be more conscious of the contradiction because they don't change from one channel all the way into another channel as often as men do. And so if they feel a conflict between what it means to be a woman, an adult woman who should be able to fulfill these hopes and these dreams and these goals and these aspirations and be this person, but then this is who they feel like they have to be the wife, and this is who they feel they have to be the mother. That one of the advantages that women classically have had is that the higher percentage of them live in the contradiction, and that awareness and the desire to give voice to that awareness has led to a vocabulary that has helped create a better understanding. Well, I think it's about time for the gentleman to really pause and look. Now, if you have to step into a different channel and just look at the three channels separately and discreetly, hey, I am 100% for that. That's honestly a lot of how I do it. My brain works a lot like a typical male brain, and that I am a channel thinker. Now, I'm also a bit ADHD. So for me, when I have my primary channel and that's where I'm focused, It's like, oh, I've got a bunch of other things running in the background that keep grabbing my attention. That's one of the we call it attention deficit. What it really is, it's more of a focus deficit because everything keeps grabbing my attention. And then in the dyslexia, it's like things flip around from time to time where I can't always tell if something's forward or backwards or left or right. And I have to really pause. And if I look at it in both directions, it looks the same in both directions. I know one of them's wrong, but understanding how like all that like networks out and all these different things it helps me take a look at things, and it helps me see things a bit differently. And if we are able to stop assuming that because I have certain difficulties in certain things, it therefore means someone else doesn't. That because I'm a man and I go through this experience, it doesn't mean that women aren't going through their experience. Likewise, if I'm a woman and I'm going through this experience, it doesn't mean men don't go through this experience. We have this idea that's going around more on the ideological left about how men are the oppressors, as though there's been this hierarchy and like every male's up on top and every female's down on the bottom. That is by no means even remotely how life has been going. That when you look over the totality of history and you see just how absolutely difficult life has been for almost everybody, almost everywhere in the world, and to this day still is, you begin to realize, it's not so much that men have always had it easy and women have always had it hard. It's that everyone's had it hard. And that one of the ways we've dealt with the hard is by the way we've organized our teamwork. And part of the way we've organized our teamwork as men and women historically has been in a significant degree tied to biology. Because if you look at the man deal and you look at the woman deal. So look at the man deal and the woman deal. As a woman, especially if you consider yourself a feminist woman, would you like to just swap deals where the woman gets the man deal, the man gets the woman deal? Now, here's your extra complications. You get the man deal. Now that means you not only get all the perks, you also get all the responsibilities and the expectations of being male. So all the things that's part of the man's world are now yours to take. But we're going to eliminate all feminine products, no pads, no tampons. We're going to eliminate all birth control. So if you have sex, expect to get pregnant. And despite that, you still have to fulfill all the male expectations. So when you are expecting, when you have the baby, when you have your menstrual cycle, no matter what's going on, you still have to keep on performing at the exact same level that you would have to do as a man, day in, day out, with that deal. Okay, well, without feminine products and without birth control, some of these things get to be a bit challenging. Now, as men, it really does make sense to have kind of the masculine and feminine division of stuff at a time in history where biology defined and drove so much of that. But we no longer live in those times in the first world. Now, in much of the world, that really is still how things are. But that means that now, today, in the first world, the game is different because that level of biological determinism no longer governs the lives of females. So just because you grow up with a female body does not now tell you that, well, as soon as you get married, you're probably going to have a kid. And then a couple of years after you have a kid, you're probably going to have another kid. And a couple of years after you have that kid, you're probably going to have another kid. And you have this monthly cycle and there's really nothing you can do. Okay, that's not life today. And so it's much more egalitarian and therefore ought to be treated as such. And to the extent that we walk in responsibility, we walk in our initiative, supercharged with inviting, we walk in our power, supercharged with selflessness, and we compete fairly. Man to woman, black to white, all of it, just human with human. And we let the whole thing be fair. We have to understand in the bell curve normal distribution, guess what's going to happen? Different human beings are going to get different outcomes. And different human beings who behave in different ways will get different outcomes because they behave in different ways. And one of our challenges with our behavior is to make sure that our behavior does not diminish others. And it doesn't diminish others for any unjustified reason. Now, I am a big believer in gentlemanly niceties. And so if I'm doing the gentlemanly niceties for a lady, that should be elevating the lady. Just as if the lady is doing the ladylike niceties for me as a gentleman, that should elevate me as a gentleman. And when I'm elevating the people around me, gentleman, the gentleman, gentleman, the lady, people are elevating me, gentleman, the gentleman, lady, the gentleman. All of us get elevated. And that's kind of how polite society works, when polite society is actually being polite. But one of the things is we move forward from here. That I'm asking husbands and wives, men and women, young and old alike, is to understand the similarity of our experiences. To not presume that just because something happened to me, that it was done to me by another group. That my experience is my experience. That the experience of any given group I might be part of is a collection of the individual experiences of the members of that group. It doesn't mean that members of not my group did it to me. It does mean it happened. And as the group changes, we may begin to realize, oh, wait, this is a human experience. So as between husbands and wives, if you're feeling like the life you're living has created a fundamental conflict of identity, rather than just live with the conflict, really give that some thought. There was a man that I knew when he was a boy who was always told what to do. And he got this idea in his head as a boy, when I'm a grown up, I can do what I want. Well, the way he internalized do what I want was specifically, don't do what I'm told. That means if someone told him to do something, he reflexively wanted to not do the thing he was told, even if in his head he thought, well, that's a good idea, but because you told me, now I can't do it because I'm a man and I don't do what I'm told. I'm not a boy anymore. Okay, well, that's wildly dysfunctional. If you stop to think about it, go, okay, well, what does being an adult have to do with being responsible, being mature? What does being mature have to do with that? It's like, well, do what you're supposed to do without being told. Well, I do what I'm supposed to do, whether I'm told or not. That just means that I don't have to wait for someone to tell me. If I wait for someone to tell me, I'm being obedient. If I do it without being told, I'm being responsible. But it still boils down to what I'm supposed to do. Well, if I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do, if I actively reject a good idea just because someone else gave it to me, then I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. Well, that's not responsible. And so the more thought we give to this and the more we really explore it and the more collaborative we are with this, the better we do. The more we can accomplish, the further forward we can go. And we can start to celebrate the differences that are in support of one another, and rather than accuse and attack. Now, this whole thing is not new, because Paul tells us in the Bible that we are all part of the body of Christ. And when you think about the collective as large as the church, and I'll use the church meaning all Christianity, some of us are good at certain things. Some of us are good at other things. All of it needs to be done. What roles in society can we dispense with? Some people would look down on the garbage collector. Okay, well, let's eliminate garbage collecting from our lives. Then what happens? Oh, well, that's not any good. So the garbage collector is kind of essential. And we Someone has looked down on the fast food employee as, well, it's just an entry-level position. Well, it's true that almost anyone can do the job, but let's eliminate the group of people that work fast food. And now no fast food suddenly available. Now what do? It completely changes the equation of life when we begin to realize that everyone has a place in this world, and therefore everyone should be treated with the dignity and the respect of someone who has an important place in this world. Now, a lot of us will be fulfilling roles, doing jobs that don't resonate with our heart and our spirit. Honestly, that's okay. Bring your heart and your spirit into the thing that is yours to do. Rather than just see the mismatch, see how much can you make it match, and how can you then build toward the thing that is part of who you are and what you want. And if we do this collaboratively, and Father's Day is coming up as I'm recording this, it's 2 weeks before Father's Day. And ideally, where there's a father, there's a mother. Ideally, as married parents with a parenting partnership, where it's not the mother's mothering and the father is the assistant to the parent, not where the father is parenting and the mother is the assistant to the parent, but where the mother and the father as husband and wife connect in their primary partnership, and the partnership, the team parents. We're going to talk about parenting, and we're going to talk about, being a father, and we're going to celebrate masculinity and celebrate fatherhood. But right now, to be thinking about the similarities. And in particular, for men who occasionally feel attacked by women and by feminist thought and all of the idea, and said, have the conversation. And so if the feminists, I'll put that in quote, in your family are women that are important to you, talk to them about their experience. Now, if they start to play the blame game of, well, men this and men that, that's like, okay, well, we're not talking about blame, because if you want to talk patriarchy and you want to talk men, well, I'm a man. So you're saying I am responsible. And oh, no, not you. You're different. It's like, okay, so you're saying I'm not a man. No, that's not what we mean. You know what we mean. So, well, no, I don't know what you mean, but this will work much better if you share your experience without blaming me, without blaming my sex, without blaming half of the population of the world, like every single member of the other half of the population is responsible. And what you will tend to find is that the things that they're expressing, we have an analog to. Therefore, we should have some empathy for that. We should go, oh, well, my experience of that is that there is a masculine version of that. So therefore, I should have more understanding. And if you have listened well and connected well, and they're curious enough, and this is the admonition of women, is also be open to the masculine experience of the same thing. And then what we will find is it is a human experience. A lot of the things we go through as Christians, all of us go through. A lot of things that apply to us as Christians, like we all work together. We're all the body of Christ. We are all the body of humanity, whether you're a Christian or not. And we each have roles that keep our society functioning. And if we have no role, if we're a net drain, then we can seek out where we can be a net plus and find a place for us. And all of this is here if we seek it out. So I hope this has been helpful as part of the lead-in of the innate similarity of all of us, the innate humanity of all of us. And one of the reasons why I understand women so well is because the masculine experience isn't really all that different. That the specifics may vary, but the human experience is really the human experience. So this is Pastor Scott Conway at Xian, the how-to real answers. Explain it all. Maybe it doesn't mean what they say. God trusting, Bible believing, saved by Jesus. Church.